A lot of people report that that happens when they're in the shower.
So, like, my brain is consciously processing things that I'm not consciously aware of.
It's unconsciously processing things that you're not consciously aware of.
What is consciousness?
People often make a distinction between a couple of different senses of that term. The kind that's most interesting is what is often called phenomenal consciousness, which is what it's like to have an experience. Some people say the redness of red. The thing is, you can't really define it. You have to kind of point to it.
When we talk about it, are we talking about it in a philosophical sense, or are we talking it more of in a biological, physical sense? Is this something that we could say, there's consciousness, we can point to it, we can find it in a brain image or whatever? Or is this more something that exists kind of as an idea?
The most clear version of this is just an idea. The idea there is that we have, as the energy impinges on our sense organs, that creates signals in our perceptual areas of the brain, and then they compete with one another. And some of those activations lose out in the battle, the competition, and only one or two of them get sent to the frontal and parietal cortex in the front of the head and the middle of the head. And those are once they're sent that way, they can be used by any cognitive system, reporting, deciding, betting, and that's called global broadcasting.
It kind of sounds to me like something is interpreting all of the information that is coming in, and then making a decision around that.
You're thinking of the mythical I who is interpreting everything, but actually the brain is a whole set of subsystems with processing done of different things in different areas.
Yeah, I guess in my mind, when I'm picturing my consciousness, it's just sitting here in my brain. Like there's just a space here in my brain, and there's this little entity that is the consciousness. But it sounds more like, no, really, it's all over the place. And this part's doing this, and that part's doing that.
I'm a believer in the consciousness being located pretty much in the back of the head and in the systems that do the processing. So consciousness of motion is done in the motion areas in the back of the head, known as V5. It's the early vision is the areas are numbered V1, V2, V3, V4, V5. But consciousness of color would be in a different part of the brain. And I think the consciousness is in those areas.
Why is it so hard to figure out? Like, why haven't we just pinpointed this thing down?
That's because it's very hard to separate the conscious experience from the processes involved in thinking about what you've seen or heard. The general category here is consciousness versus cognition. And let me give you an example of an experiment. Okay, so there is this phenomenon called binocular rivalry. And the idea of that is if you have one picture sent to one eye and a different picture sent to the other eye. For example, a house in one eye and a face in the other eye. And what vision scientists have discovered is that if you present these properly, people's experience will be first a face in their whole visual field, then a house in their whole visual field, then a face again, then a house again. I do this routinely in my classes with red and green glasses and a red and green superimposed image of a face and a house. And everybody experiences this. It goes on forever. Face, then house, then face, then house. Okay, so the stimulus is the same, but your experience changes. So you might think all we have to do is look at the brain and see what's changing when people are aware of a face versus when they're aware of a house. And that experiment has been done many times. And the problem is that what's changing is both the representation in the face area and the house area, but also the cognitive areas, because when you see a face, you're thinking stuff about the face. When you see a house, you're thinking stuff about the house. And then the question is, where do you draw the line between the experience and the cognition of it? That's the problem.
Makes me wonder, right? So are all of our consciousnesses in the general sense, are they all the same? Or are they all different to the extent that we could all just be experiencing the world in totally, totally different ways?
Well, that is a topic much discussed. So the best version of it is what's called the inverted spectrum hypothesis. Things that you and I both call green look to you the way things we both call red look to me. In other words, my green is your red, my red is your green. So this was historically first proposed by John Locke. Historically, many people thought, especially with the legacy of Wittgenstein, that this was nonsense, that it made no sense at all. It was like talking about what time is it on the sun. So Wittgenstein's example was, is it 5 o'clock on the sun? Well, the trouble is 5 o'clock only makes sense with respect to an Earth-centric time zone. There is no answer to what time it is on the sun.
If you were kind of going to put things on, let's say, a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
10 is the highest. 10, we got this whole damn thing figured out. 1, we don't even know where the brain is. Where do you feel like we are in terms of consciousness?
Oh, maybe 2 to 3. We're really at the beginning. One thing to remember, you may not know this because you're too young to know this, but fMRI, which has been the workhorse of brain scanning for some years, was only brought online in a usable form in the late 1990s. So we've only been getting real data about the brain for 30 years.
Yeah. Do you think that we'll be able to answer those questions? Or is this just fundamentally a thing like, God, we can't figure this out? And we might never.
Well, there is this thing called the hard problem of consciousness. That is a term given to it by my colleague David Chalmers. And the hard problem is that even if we know what the neural basis of an experience is, that would not tell us why it's the neural base of that experience instead of some other experience or no experience. So you might be able to get a good correlational understanding of what consciousness is in the brain, but why that's the neural basis of consciousness might be much harder to find out. Some people think we'll never solve it. Other people think, well, we just have to keep going and see if, we need a breakthrough. We need a new theory. And then still other people think there's something wrong with the question. It doesn't really make any sense.
For somebody who might be listening to this and just thinking, I have no idea what these two people are talking about. Like, I am so lost. What does this kind of ultimately mean?
Consciousness is super important. It's important with regard to suffering. What is suffering? It's a form of consciousness. So if we want to know whether what we're doing to animals is bad, we need to know whether they suffer. So, for example, some people think insects are conscious. Were we to discover that insects are conscious, then there would be a lot of pressure to be careful about the use of insecticide. And then there's AI. So many people are concerned about AI welfare. That is, whether the AI systems we have are suffering and whether we need laws to protect them. So this issue of consciousness is not a purely academic issue. It impacts real world policies, and the pressure to make some kinds of decisions will get ever stronger as AI gets more sophisticated and as we learn more about animals.
Could humans exist without it?
Well, it looks like sophisticated reasoning requires consciousness, although nobody knows for sure, because the AIs do sophisticated reasoning and maybe they're not conscious. So I guess maybe the right answer is we don't know.
This kind of gets into some of our harder/listeners submitted questions. So are you ready for some?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Does our consciousness change? Are we the same person every day, every year, every month, every et cetera like that? Does it seem to change, or is it like, nope, it's fairly standard?
I think the fair answer to that is we don't know. Most people report that they're pretty much the same today as yesterday.
So we're made up of cells and all these other things that I can't quite remember, like exactly what we're made up of. Like, are my cells part of my consciousness? Is my bones part of my consciousness? Or
there are these people called panpsychists who think that everything is conscious. I myself don't take that too seriously, and I know you'd have to hard trouble finding a neuroscientist who takes that seriously. For one thing, it wouldn't solve any problems, because even if the electrons and protons in our body are conscious, you'd have to explain how putting those things together makes us conscious.
They don't take it seriously because there's proof that it's not, or just like that's way too, like, well, you're taking this way too far.
Look, everything we have discovered about consciousness is based in the brain. So here's a sample. When you attend to something, it looks slightly bigger. My colleague Marissa Carrasco in the psych department at NYU has shown conclusively that when you focus your attention on something, it slightly increases in apparent size. And she has explained that neurally. The way it works is, in our visual system, we have what's called a receptive field of each neuron. Namely, it's aimed at a certain area of space. And what happens when you attend is the neurons, if your receptive field of a neuron is right on the object you're attending to, the surrounding neurons start focusing on that area too, giving a larger brain area. So the reason something looks bigger when you attend is there's more brain focusing on it. So we can explain something about how things look, and the explanations are always in the brain. So looking to somewhere else is not going to work.
I know, so we have the conscious and the subconscious, but how can things be happening in my brain that I'm not aware of? That's always fascinated me, right? Because, like, I don't know exactly where my hands are, but my brain knows where my hands are, but I'm not thinking about where my hands are. So, like, is that part of my consciousness? Like, how can I be aware of things I'm not conscious about?
Everybody who's an academic has had the experience of posing a question to themselves and then doing something else where they relax executive control, and then the answer done by the guys in the back room just presents itself to us. So there's a lot of reasoning that appears to be going on unconsciously. Many people have described this, and we're all familiar with this happening. You're worried about something, and then you think about something else, and then the answer pops into your head. A lot of people report that happens when they're in the shower.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the shower, you're thinking about, your mind, your mental control is relaxing.
So, like, my brain is consciously processing things that I'm not consciously aware of.
It's unconsciously processing things that you're not consciously aware of.
Then am I missing out on, like, is that a good thing or am I missing out on so much of the world?
Well, you're missing out on a lot of your reasoning process, but maybe it works better if you're missing out on it.
Yeah, you can only think about so many things, right?
Yeah, and maybe there are that kinds of things that are just better done unconsciously.
Does there seem to be any rhyme or reason for, like, okay, this type of thing is going to be done unconsciously and this type of thing is going to be done consciously?
It looks like certain kinds of reasoning, pattern recognition reasoning is better done unconsciously. Whereas multiple steps that you have to keep in mind, maybe that requires consciousness in humans.
It sounds kind of like the brain needs the boss to leave the room.
Exactly.
Are we the only things that seem to be conscious? Like, my dog is over here. Is my dog conscious?
We have every reason to believe that higher primates are just as conscious as we are. They have many of the same conscious phenomena. So here's an example. If you see a spiral going this way and focus on it, and then you look at a white wall, you'll see the opposite spiral. So it's called sensory adaptation. And higher primates, they all do that. They all have that same experience, including, like, the first one was to be studied was gorillas. So the way you do that is you train the gorilla to make one response if it's going this way and another response if it's going that way. And then you show him this thing and he makes that response. And then he looks at a white wall, you show him a white screen and he makes the other response.
What happens when we die?
I think you turn into dirt.
Can we look at a brain and be like, the consciousness is gone?
Well, when there's no neural activity, the consciousness is gone.
It's not something that, like, because the inevitable question is, but could our consciousness somehow continue in another form?
There's no evidence for that at all. It would be nice, but no, I don't think so.
Is it something we could transfer?
Well, that is a topic of much interest. Can we upload our mind to the cloud or transfer it into a more youthful brain or transfer it into a machine? And, if you think that consciousness depends on the biology of the brain, then transferring your mind to the cloud is going to make your mind unconscious. So that's what I think. I think it's the biology of the brain that's crucial.
Since we're talking about kind of uploading, which reminds me of computers, do you think AI is conscious?
Well, I think it's a topic of a lot of discussion. So, one way of approaching it is to ask whether the theories of consciousness, human consciousness, apply to machines. So, for example, one of the theories that I mentioned is the global workspace theory. So does AI have a global workspace? Well, many people think no, because our current AI systems anyway are mostly feed forward. And the global workspace, in fact, every major theory of consciousness says a feed forward system is not conscious, a purely feed forward system. Because in the human brain, all conscious activity, according to any theory of consciousness, requires a lot of feedback with feedback loops. So there is an issue as to whether there really is a global workspace in current machines, or whether we can make a global workspace in current machines. So I would say that this is one of those questions that nobody knows the answer to.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about consciousness?
I think the biggest misconception is to confuse access consciousness with phenomenal consciousness.
Hate to kind of retread old ground, but I'm still I don't quite understand the difference between access consciousness and phenomenal consciousness.
Access consciousness is a purely informational notion. It means if I see a red thing, it means that I can report that it's red. I can use the fact that I'm seeing a red thing in reasoning. I can ask myself the question, Well, if I'm seeing a red thing, why is it red? How did the red thing get here? Whereas phenomenal consciousness is just raw experience.
Just kind of living life versus thinking about a particular thing. Is that a dumb guy way of kind of looking at it?
No, it's the kind of experience that maybe a baby has, even if it doesn't have any concepts of anything and can't reason about anything. It's just raw experience.
Do we seem to have consciousness from the very beginning?
So there's very good evidence. Actually, much of it done by my colleague here at NYU, Claudia Passos. Very good evidence that newborns are conscious. And there's a lot of research on fetal consciousness. Nobody really knows, but definitely by the time a fetus is born, it has conscious experience.
I mean, could somebody exist without it? Is there any documented cases of somebody being alive and not having conscious experiences?
Oh yeah, people in a persistent coma may not have any conscious experience.
Any with somebody like just going about their day?
Oh no, none of those. But there are these cases of hydrocephalic infants. That is, infants born without a cortex. And there is a real question as to whether they're conscious.
What do you think is the single most interesting thing you've learned about consciousness?
I think the thing that has gotten me most excited recently is reasons to think that consciousness is some kind of an analog process that cannot be understood computationally. So, I mean, there's no hard evidence on this, but the evidence is accumulating, I think, that it isn't a computational thing, that it depends on waves in the brain and the electrochemical activity in the brain. So that's quite exciting because it's a different focus. Instead of focusing on the computations, we can focus on more the mechanisms, the electrochemical mechanisms.
Can we go back, right? So obviously we're descended from apes. Can we go back and be like, okay, what was our nearest ancestor that maybe wasn't conscious?
There is a controversy about what the first animals were. And the controversy is whether they're sponges, which have no neurons, and a kind of organism called the comb jelly. So it turns out the comb jelly have a purely electrical neural net, whereas we do not have a purely electrical system. We have a system with neurotransmitters. So we have neurons where when a neuron fires, it emits neurotransmitters into the soup around the neurons. And then they're taken up by other neurons. That's how your brain works. It works with electrical signals changed into chemicals. Those chemicals are then taken up by another neuron, turned into electrical energy, and then more chemicals get injected into the soup. So that's how your brain works. The ctenophores, the comb jellies, their brain doesn't work like that. And they are an evolutionary dead end. The next stage up, cnidarians, which include the sea anemone and true jellyfish, those are much more like us. And they even have a sleep-wake cycle recently discovered. Although they don't really have a brain, their nervous systems seem more akin to ours. So I think that's the place to look for the first glimmers of consciousness.
Your favorite conspiracy theory / wildest theory about consciousness?
That consciousness is an illusion, that there is no such thing, that we've convinced ourselves that there is. There are lots of people who think that.
If we're not conscious, then what are we?
Yeah, well, many people have pointed out that there's something slightly self-contradictory about this, because what does it mean to say it's an illusion? An illusion is an appearance of something, but an appearance is a conscious experience. So if there's an appearance of consciousness, then we're conscious.
Perception is reality, right? Like the simple fact that you had that thought proves that you are conscious in some way.
Yeah, exactly.